Nobody grows up thinking they're gonna be a domestic terrorist. And yet, here I am.
Thanks. Thank you. There you go. It's all good. All good. What was yesterday like? What does it all mean? Rather than doing a bunch of interviews, I thought I'd give my view of what happened yesterday and the way forward for the country, and try to get back to South Carolina and help the transition here. The first thing that stands out to me is how embarrassed and disgusted I am that the United States Capitol could be taken over by domestic terrorists while we're in session, transferring power from one president to the other. That a band of people who are terrorists, not patriots, literally occupied the floor of the House, drove the Senate out of its chamber.
Solution. Pause the count. Foster.
Protesters are in the building.
Thank you.
The House will be in order.
And the question for the country is, how could that happen 20 years after 9/11?
USA! USA! USA!
The intelligence that we based our planning on indicated that the January 6th protests were expected to be similar to the previous MAGA rallies in 2020, which drew tens of thousands of participants. The assessment indicated that members of the Proud Boys, white supremacist groups, Antifa, and other extremist groups were expected to participate on January 6th, and that they may be inclined to become violent. We properly planned for a mass demonstration with possible violence. What we got was a military-style coordinated assault on my officers and a violent takeover of the Capitol building.
Luis Ruiz here reporting live from the Capitol building where protesters have come down to the Capitol building. Right behind me. There's been flashbangs, there has been tear gas. You hear chants of USA, you hear chants of Stop the Steal. People are not taking it. People are upset, and for very good reason.
Time magazine confirmed what many felt just a few months later.
Every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome of the election was defeated, says Ian Bassin, co-founder of Protect Democracy.
There was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes. One that both curtailed the protests and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Both surprises were the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists and business titans. Both sides would come to see it as a sort of implicit bargain, inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive racial justice protests, in which the forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace and oppose Trump's assault on democracy.
What happens if this doesn't work?
We just keep trying. Any way we need to, we just keep trying. We gotta get violent.
Please, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Luis Ruiz. I'm a filmmaker, writer, and activist from the border. I've spent 15 years perfecting my craft, practicing with filmmakers from across the world. Although I respect Trump, I'm not a Trump supporter. The federal debt exploded under his watch. He shut down the country for 15 days. He quarterbacked Operation Warp Speed.
Our investment will make it possible for the vaccine to be provided by Pfizer free of charge. Pfizer said it wasn't part of Warp Speed, but that turned out to be a unfortunate misrepresentation. They are part. That's why we gave them the $1.95 billion.
He failed to invoke the Insurrection Act. He put Fauci in charge. He put Mark Milley in charge.
New chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley.
Immediately after that 149 call, I alerted the U.S. Army senior leadership of the request. The approval for Chief Son's request would eventually come from the Acting Secretary of Defense and be relayed to me by Army senior leaders at 5:08 p.m., about 3 hours and 19 minutes later.
And now, the big idea.
For decades, the United States military's fight for hearts and minds was fought exclusively on foreign soil. Now, the fight for hearts and minds is coming home stateside. The U.S. Army, along with their partners in the intelligence community, the pharmaceutical industry, big tech, the corporate industrial complex and our love child, the woke brigade, have come together to fight for the hearts and minds of the American people by using the tried and true method of divide and conquer, namely fighting racism, sexism, classism, genderism, ableism and religiosism. We'll save this country from racist rednecks who want to take our porn, our abortions, our Twitter and the ability to make out with whatever we want, whenever we want. Can't find any racism? Make some yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Race hoax.
Welcome to Talladega, where we try for the second day to get 500 miles of racing in. Weather prevented that yesterday. King Richard Petty's here. And this was just recently painted in the tri-oval grass. All of NASCAR's drivers have rallied around Bubba Wallace, the NASCAR Cup Series lone black driver, after what happened here yesterday afternoon. The drivers, led by reigning Cup Series champion Kyle Busch in green, and their crews, the entire garage area, has rallied around Bubba Wallace and the number 43 today.
This morning, NASCAR is trying to find out who carried out an abhorrent racist act. Officials found a noose in the garage of driver Bubba Wallace.
Yeah. I mean, that this happens in the year 2020 is just beyond belief. Wallace is the only black driver in NASCAR's top racing circuit. He's also been an outspoken supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement that appears on his car in the wake of George Floyd.
I heard, as I was crossing the intersection, I heard Empire. And I don't answer to Empire. My name ain't Empire. And I didn't answer. I kept walking, and then I heard Empire. So I turned around and I said, "The did you just say to me?" And I see the attacker masked, and he said, "This MAGA country," punches me right in the face. So I punched his ass back. So I picked up the phone and I said, "Brandon," and he's like, "What's going on?" And I said, "I was just jumped." And then I looked down and I see that there's a rope around my neck. I noticed the rope around my neck and I started screaming. And I said, "There's a rope around my neck."
And if you can't treat someone from another race or a different color skin with dignity and respect, then you need to get out. The power of that diversity comes together and makes us that much more powerful.
Well, like many in the media, we ran this clip because it provided a powerful response to racism that the media demanded after Charlottesville. While the clip ran, I kept shaking my head, for I'd seen this story before. The list of hate crime hoaxes is long. Now we must add this one to the tally. According to the Air Force Times, a black cadet admitted to writing the slurs, and he's since left the school. So what's the response when we see stories like these exposed as hoaxes? It's never as huge as the initial response was when we assumed that it was real.
The FBI says the noose found in Bubba Wallace's garage at Talladega Speedway was a garage pull that had been there for months and that he was not the target of a hate crime. But Bubba Wallace says he's not done fighting yet.
Race car driver Bubba Wallace is not backing down today, even after the FBI determined there was no hate crime.
It's a straight up noose.
The police have gone through a lot of video, and they were able to capture an image of two people of interest. Have you seen that image, and do you believe that they could possibly be the attackers?
I don't have any doubt in my mind that that's them. Never did.
Big development in the Jussie Smollett investigation. Chicago police have arrested 2 suspects in the case, believed to be the 2 men spotted in that security camera footage the night of the incident. Here's what we've learned about the 2 bodybuilding brothers now being questioned.
The Jussie Smollett investigation is taking a shocking turn with the arrest of these 2 men.
Both know Smollett and have appeared on his TV show Empire as bit actors.
Jussie Smollett in custody and under arrest just minutes ago. Police released his mugshot. Here it is. In just a short time from now, he'll be in front of a judge for a bond hearing. Investigators say he is no victim and that his story is now unraveling.
So what's the response when we see stories like these exposed as hoaxes?
The events known as Tikigate center around the use of a racial hoax in order to influence the outcome of an election. In this case, the race for governor of Virginia between Terry McAuliffe and Greg Youngkin. Virginia Democrat members showed up to a campaign stop of Youngkin's dressed up as white supremacists carrying tiki torches meant to recall the events of Charlottesville a few years before. NBC affiliates covered the story as a legitimate story, and McAuliffe campaign surrogates made statements denouncing the supposed white supremacists. Immediately, the internet went to work and found the actual identities of those involved, all of which were affiliated with the McAuliffe campaign and Virginia Democrats. Rather than admit their hoax, they doubled down and claimed to do so in protest.
The Lincoln Project added tiki torches to the mix. But will they burn the candidate they were trying to help?
Instead of taking the much-deserved L, Democrats and the media doubled down on their fraud, staging another race-baiting incident, this time with a Confederate flag.
Well, Trump-approved Republican Glenn Youngkin's closing message to Virginia voters has almost singularly focused on
Despite
weaponizing
Democrat race-baiting tactics, Youngkin beat McAuliffe to become Virginia governor, providing media, NBC specifically, an opportunity to cry racism.
Here, the only reason that we're talking about critical race theory is because Glenn Youngkin had 18 months to convince people that he was not a fire-breathing, horns out of his skull racist. You can only talk about critical race theory if you present yourself as the kind of neutral white guy who's like, I don't dislike brown people. I just think this is going a little too far.
Now you might be asking yourself, what the fuck is critical race theory? If that's you, don't worry, you're not the only one. No one actually knows what it means because in reality, critical race theory can mean anything, depending on who's talking.
If you primarily studied the culture of your ancestors in elementary school, take a step forward.
If your ancestors were forced to come to the United States, not by choice, take a step backwards.
So this is what they call a privilege line, and they ask a series of questions about how you may be privileged in life, and if you can see towards the front.
We're talking about kind of all the isms, so we'll focus on racism, sexism, ableism, but then we're also focusing on like, how do you have a productive conversation?
Here in Arizona, campers pay up to $500 to spend the week talking about these controversial issues.
We're gonna take a look at white privilege. We're gonna take a look at like how that plays out through different identities, right?
That phrase, tip of the iceberg, there's identity that people see, but then there's identity that's deeper.
I'm hearing constantly that I wasn't Black enough. It does make me think, well, what am I supposed to be?
Midweek, campers break into small groups based on shared experiences like race or sexual orientation, and they talk about what ties them together.
People don't recognize their own ideas as racist. And so I can ask anybody, why, for instance, is the Black unemployment rate twice as high in this country as the white unemployment rate? There's only two ways they can answer that question. Either they can say there's something wrong with Black workers or something right about white workers, which is an explicit expression of racist ideas, or they could say what? Racist policies. And so I think it's how we're asking the question can actually get people to see what's actually in their mind.
These types of conversations can be very difficult. Why don't we take a minute to relax? Breathe in. Breathe out. Are you confused? Good. That's the fucking point. Fret not, Habibi, we've got your back. And now, for the first time ever, we give you woke translations.
Is critical race theory Marxism?
Look, you know what? Here's the thing, Joy. Critical race theory is not so much a thing, it's a way of looking at a thing.
critical race theory is the most latest and most eloquent, quite frankly, iteration of the Southern strategy in a way, quite frankly, to tribalize an election, to tribalize an electorate in a way to drive up the white vote.
Is there a K through 12 curriculum on critical race theory that's being taught in schools around this country?
Here's the deal. This is not about whether anything called critical race theory is in K through 12. What they're calling critical race theory doesn't exist anyway. It is a backlash effort to reverse the racial reckoning unlike any we've seen in our lifetime. And as you pointed out at the beginning, they can't say, we're for racism. They can't say Derek Chauvin should have killed George Floyd with his hand in his pocket, looking like he was completely without a care in the world. They couldn't say that.
I'm sure you've heard someone say, "I'm not racist." Anybody heard that? And so when someone says to me, "I'm not racist," I typically respond, well, what is a not racist? Like, what does it mean to be not racist as opposed to racist? And typically people have never actually thought about that question. And it's also the case that typically people cannot even define racist. And typically the concept of not racism is really an act of denial.
I've got over 1,000 folks ready to go. We're not sure. 1,000 go. I don't care. My First Amendment rights. My First Amendment rights are here. If you want to talk to me, I'd be happy to talk to you. You're not challenged. Time. You're not challenged. Time. Press the floor. Yeah, right now, something's okay. I'm so real. I can work. I'm ready for it.
August the 2nd was a big night. After weeks of preparation, we launched Power X Freelance, a digital marketing and filmmaking seminar. Excitement was palpable. Some of the participants started doing improv.
You know what this is fucking like? I met this girl, most beautiful fucking woman I've ever met, right? I can't believe she's into my fat ass. I can't believe she would ever want to be seen walking down the street with me, let alone, right? Turns out she used to be a prostitute, but that's okay. That's fucking okay. I'm an open-minded man, 21st century man right here. But that's fucking okay.
Let me give you some of the third eye knowledge.
We woke to tragedy.
The policy is heinous, but we have to be careful with broad sweeping generalizations.
We need to clear the event in interview because there's an active shooter at Cielo Vista. So
oh my God, can I tell them? You all, I am so sorry. There's an active shooter. We are going to need to clear the event.
We have just learned a short while ago that there has been a shooting in El Paso. And at this point, the area has still not been cleared. It's still considered active. We know that there's a lot of injury, a lot of suffering in El Paso right now.
We were getting Valentine's studio ready for the first day of workshops when we first heard of the shooting.
Scene is still active. We have multi-reports of multiple shooters. Please avoid area police conducting search of a very large area. Media staging will be given when area is secure.
We hightailed it to Cielo Vista area to document the incident. The area was blocked off, so we parked across the freeway. A black helicopter flew over and pointed its turret at us. We left immediately. Back at the studio, we canceled the day's workshop, drinking heavily and watching the news come in. It was all over social media, multiple shooters, multiple locations.
Texas Governor Abbott arrived in town. A press conference was announced. Valentine and I drove to it with our boy Nick. You could feel it in the air. El Paso would never be the same.
Thank you, Governor. We appreciate your attendance here.
The press conference was already underway when we got there. I set up quickly and let the camera roll. There was a weird energy in that room that I've never felt anything like since then. It was a feeling of harsh cold.
Didn't mean to step on the FBI's toes on that, but we're taking this down the road of simply a murder investigation with numerous casualties. And as I said, the state of Texas will be the lead prosecuting agency in this.
Chief, what is the hate crime specifically?
Pardon me,
what
sir?
was the nature of the manifesto?
Well, I can't get into specifics on that right now because we have to validate for certainty that this was the manifesto from this individual that we've arrested. So with that in play, we still have to be aware of the fact that this person is still entitled to fair process as far as the law. We don't want to complicate that by making any statements right now that might be tainting the investigation.
We are doing more than ever before to keep students safe at school. During that time, we did not, as far as I know, evaluate for and plan for an incident like this. That said, I can tell you that perhaps the most profound and agreed upon issue that came out of all of those hearings was the need for the state and for society to do a better job of dealing with challenging mental health-based issues. We know that's a component.
The question about the manifesto and this emerging narrative that we're seeing throughout our country as to domestic terrorism.
Although I didn't realize it at the time, that was the exact moment rogue elements of the United States government openly declared war against citizens of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, domestic terrorist narrative.
The question about the manifesto and this emerging narrative that we're seeing throughout our country as to domestic terrorism, which is, and obviously I want to say we don't know. We have to allow the investigation to continue. I respect the process, very much so, but without regard to this particular instance, not speaking about this particular instance, which is still under investigation, but the manifesto narrative is fueled by hate, and it's fueled by racism and bigotry and division. And I want to say the national media is watching. El Paso has historically been a very safe community. We've been safe for decades. We will continue to be safe. This is someone who came from outside of our community to do us harm. A community that has shown nothing but generosity and kindness to the least among us. Those people arriving at America's front door.
Except Veronica Escobar's husband, Michael Blitters, a Trump-appointed federal judge who, alongside other judges, was named in a complaint alleging denial of due process to immigrants.
And the developers who crafted the Glass Beach study, a racist study advocating the replacement of so-called dusty Mexicans with the image of affluent whites for economic development purposes, who just happened to fund the campaigns of both Veronica Escobar and former Mayor Dee Margo, who is sitting next to Governor Greg Abbott.
Kindness to the least among us. Those people arriving at America's front door. And so we'll wait to see what happens with this investigation. Once we have a determination by law enforcement, then I think you will see a lot of us coming together to make some very strong statements, but for now we will let the investigation continue.
To echo what Congressman Escobar said, this person did not come from El Paso. It is not what we are about. We are a special community, and this would not have happened from an El Pasoan.
I couldn't stand it. All at once, it became too much for me to bear. I ran out the door and left my camera recording. I texted Nick and asked him to bring it out to me.
press conference. If we find out anything different that we can expound upon later, I want to thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Congresswoman, you started the day at the center of the immigration debate. You're ending the day at the center of the gun control debate. How does that change your job and what you do?
You know, for me, I need to, my immediate focus is going to need to be here for my community and to help and pitch in wherever I can. My obligation as a member of Congress is to fight for the solutions that this country and this community deserves. This was so needless. This was absolutely needless.
That's intense. See you later.
Passed the bill in 1857. They passed the bill, and there was only one party, Democrat. They passed the bill. Negroes are property. And Lincoln said no, and then he created the Republican Party. So I've kind of gone to the Republican Party after I learned that.
This community has responded in a really beautiful way. We've been awaiting more information from law enforcement and from investigators. And one of the key pieces of the investigation, key determination was made earlier. And so I'm going to read from a statement. And we have several elected officials here, including my colleague from the House of Representatives, my vecina, my neighbor, Representative Xochitl Torres Small. We have city representatives, we have state representatives, county representatives, school district representatives, and community and faith leaders who are coming together, and we're going to go on a march, and we are then going to attend 2 different vigils. But we thought that the news that we received this morning was important. So I'm going to read from the statement, and if anyone would like to comment, you're more than welcome to approach the podium or to answer questions. We are taking a moment from the time we've been spending with families and the community of El Paso to make a statement about the decision announced earlier today by United States Attorney John Bash, who confirmed that the Department of Justice would be investigating the massacre in our community as domestic terrorism. The shooter came into our community because we are an Hispanic community and because we have immigrants here. He came here to harm us. El Paso is resilient and strong.
The rate of urbanization,
sea level rise, food sustainability.
It's the mobility and transportation challenge.
We have social exclusion of some of our neighborhoods.
Not enough water, we have problem with transportation.
Resiliency is to be aware as a city.
A resilient community actually knows how to respond no matter what happens.
El trabajo es pensando en la construcción de un nuevo mundo. El trabajo es pensando en la construcción de un nuevo mundo.
So resilience is your immune system.
Nous sommes convaincus que pour résoudre les grands défis qui sont posés à nos villes, les défis du XXIe siècle, le défi climatique, risque terroriste, nous devons vraiment avoir une stratégie pour garder des enfants.
Grâce à la résilience, on peut redevenir optimiste pour le futur. Et c'est toute la force de cette approche. La culture du risque, traditionnellement, c'est plutôt de dire « attention, il y a des choses terribles qui vont arriver, il faut s'y préparer ». La culture de la résilience, c'est de dire « nous sommes confrontés à des enjeux, mais ces enjeux, nous pouvons les transformer en opportunités. Mais ces enjeux, nous pouvons les transformer en opportunités. »
Mais ces enjeux, nous pouvons les transformer en opportunités.
So, I call for our community and others across this state to hold accountable elected officials at all levels, both in the House and the Senate of the state capitol, to do something about this gun violence culture that we have, this culture of violence that we have in this country.
The House of Representatives passed 2 bipartisan common sense gun laws, and they are laying at the doorstep of Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. I would go back to Washington, D.C. tomorrow for an assault weapon ban and for more legislation that we need. That assault weapon has no business being in neighborhoods or in communities. That he bought that legally in a state that has some of the weakest gun laws in the country. There's a lot we can do and that we should do next year in 2020 that starts now. But you know, I will tell you really fundamentally, we have to treat people with dignity. When immigrants are seen as less than human, when minorities are seen as less than human, then that's what makes violence possible. That's the breeding ground for it. And so it is really the central call to action today is to lead with love. That is the lesson El Paso learned long ago. The lesson that El Paso learned long ago is that we lead with love.
Do you think Donald Trump almost got you killed yesterday?
Yeah. I'm gonna be honest, yes.
I'm pretty sure.
Especially since I'm mixed and people think I'm Mexican.
Targeting people with, her skin color.
So what are you gonna do with your Trump support now?
To me, it's going to change.
He's so focused on this fucking wall, pardon my language, but he fucked the damn wall. Focus on us.
The government should instruct federal agencies and law enforcement to draft a national plan to deal with white supremacy and domestic terrorism for what it is, a national crisis.
When we're talking about
ayer en dándoles el tour en Juárez para que hablaran con migrantes, como ellos también fueron migrantes, y vean que efectivamente no hay manera de que ellos ya pidan asilo, las puertas están cerradas hacia ellos. Escuchamos la mala noticia que ellos ya tienen, ya conocían que había un tiroteo. Y estamos hoy de aquí, no queremos perder a ninguno de ustedes. Muchísimas gracias por venir. De aquí vamos a marchar en silencio por el respeto de nuestros hermanos que perdieron la vida ayer.
Even if
y nos ligamos a la pelea de Parkland, los ligamos a los papás Manuel y Patricia que han convertido su dolor y su angustia.
Y este odio es promovido por el presidente Trump, por otros oficiales a nivel estatal aquí en Texas también y afuera de Texas. Ya es tiempo que en los Estados Unidos...
¿Cuáles oficiales?
Oficiales del Estado.
¿Cuáles? ¿Cuáles?
El lieutenant...
Be specific. Which ones?
No. Pues,
which elected officials right now are contributing to the racism?
People like...
Which ones? Specifically?
Does he want me to answer the question, or he wants to just be belligerent?
Specifically?
You don't have to be belligerent.
Can you tell me which ones specifically are contributing?
I'm saying that they are top elected officials. And if you ask me, as you just did, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick has used the term invasion.
The truth of the matter is that there was, in fact, an invasion happening at the time. This was overlooked in all of the hysteria.
Governor Greg Abbott is deploying 1,000 Texas National Guard troops to the Texas-Mexico border. He made that announcement today at the state capitol. Political reporter Ashley Godot was there, and she joins us now. And Ashley, he says Texas doesn't have a choice.
Quita, the governor says state leaders owe it to the people of Texas to keep them safe. Now, U.S. Customs and Border Protection is reporting a surge in the number of people coming into the country illegally. In May alone, more than 132,000 people were taken into custody. So just looking at the last 7 years, that's more than double the previous high total for May of about 60,000 back in 2014.
Also overlooked was the fact that Antifa leftists aligned with the Democrats were organizing caravans, effectively using humans as cattle.
How does your job change now that this is officially a terrorist attack?
I don't know that it changes my job. I think it changes law enforcement. I think it changes.
Vice News being perfectly positioned to capture Congresswoman Escobar's reaction to the massacre has never sat right with me, and as time has gone on, I've only grown more suspicious of her.
Margot say that.
It's like an NRA talking point. Totally. And it's meant to divert attention.
Another critical piece of information purposely omitted is the killer's letter specifically states Donald Trump wasn't to blame for his decision. He'd taken the decision apart from Trump.
My ideology has not changed for several years. My opinions on automation, immigration, and the rest predate Trump and his campaign for president.
None of that mattered. The script had been written and now the show had to go on.
I am putting this here because some people will blame the president or certain presidential candidates for the attack. This is not the case. I know that the media will probably call me a white supremacist anyway and blame Trump's rhetoric. The media is infamous for fake news. Their reaction to this attack will likely just confirm that.
At last, Beto's white savior moment had arrived. Beto looked up the stairs at me, knowing I had his card. When would I pull it, he must have been asking himself. I played it cool, knowing my time would come.
My family has been involved and wrapped around this mass shooting since 1998. Many of you don't remember this because they have been forgotten.
It's time for us to stand and talk and yell and scream and talk to our elected officials and make some change.
And we need to call it. And we need to say it. Hate, xenophobia, and racism has a name. And that name lives in the White House. His name is Donald Trump.
It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, what language you speak, who you love, where you came from, if you have papers or if you don't. We open up our arms and we embrace you, and we welcome you, and we tell you we love you and we care about you. And that may have been part of the reason why this beautiful community was targeted.
This act of violence costing the lives of 20 people and injuring many more ran through our community like a lightning bolt, quickly and deadly, but it is important, I think, to recognize this massacre as the latest, most painful act of violence in a long train of violence stretching back years in our community. Words can be acts of violence, accusing entire social and ethnic groups of being rapists and murderers. Walls can be an act of violence, substituting an 18-foot-high monstrosity of a barrier to replace smaller kinds of fencing and more responsible responses to the conditions that force people to come to our land.
There was a young man on my flight who approached me and introduced himself. He said that he too was flying back home to El Paso because his mother had just been shot, he had learned. Did not know her condition, only knew that she was at University Medical Center and was going to move every mountain, get on any flight, do whatever it took to be there by her side. And he asked me if I would join him with him in the intensive care unit that she was in. So we got to El Paso, went up, visited with Rosemary, who had been shot in the chest.
There's a lot of injury, a lot of suffering in El Paso right now. I'm incredibly saddened, and it is very hard to think about this.
There are multiple people who were on the scene that day who claimed more than one shooter.
Anything to share?
These guys right here were on the scene. They walk out with gloves.
We were here when it happened. Were you? What happened, man? Tell us what happened with Sun City Live Streams, man. Well, yes, the shooter came in and started shooting everybody around. A guy just came in and started shooting everybody? One guy? So far, well, what I heard is only one, but many are here too. Some saying two, and dressed all in black. Just dressed all in black, like an assault rifle, I guess, like a AK, and a bulletproof vest and such. Did she see the shooter himself?
Que si tuviste el que estaba disparando.
No, nomás miré como 3 o 4 personas que entraron con armas largas disparando nada más así, pero no les vi el
She said
rostro.
that there was people actually, she saw 3 or 4 men coming in with guns shooting.
Okay, so she saw 3 or 4 people. What were they wearing?
She said they were wearing black.
So
They were all in black.
So there was 4 people in there?
Yes.
Okay, so that's contradiction to another report we heard. So, okay, so 4 shooters, and was she saw them. So what happened to her when she...
She told us to drop down to the floor. She told me and my little brother. And then after that, I just grabbed her by her hand and my little brother. And then we tried to run back to the back. And after that, we didn't know what happened.
Tactical teams from DEA, FBI, DPS are currently searching the area, so we need people to stay away. If you have loved ones that are unaccounted for that were at the mall and you haven't been able to get a hold of them, there is a reunification center currently set up at MacArthur Middle School on Whitus Street.
This is not a false flag. We know for a fact that there is only one shooter. We know for a fact right now I have witnessed one death myself from people who can verify that. But there's a total, it looks like I think I said earlier, I don't remember what I said. This is so much happening. 18 adults, maybe 14 adults and 4 children. I think it was 18 adults and 4 children. Guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I said earlier, I believe was 18 adults